We're live. Hi everybody. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to A Branch of Laurels. I'm Shaxi from Ontier, and my guest this evening is Baroness Agnes of Whitby from Artemisia. And
hey everybody.
Hi. Welcome. She is a glass bead maker, metal worker. You play with ceramics and probably some other stuff.
Probably a little bit.
Yeah. Very cool. So I usually start off with asking what your SCA origin story is. How did you find the SCA and what made you fall in love with it?
Okay, so my SCA origin story, I started with my best friend Davo. We met when we were 12 years old in 7th grade. And we tried it in 1984. One of our friends kind of introduced us to it. And at the time we were also hosting, we spent time hosting Rocky Horror Picture Show. So we were not dress up adversant, and so, going into the SCA was like, hey, that's like a natural progression between dressing up and like hosting a film and then like going into the SCA. So it's having kind of fun. Our local group at the time was only about, it was like 5 people, maybe 6, and they were all older than us. So when we first tried, we were like 17 years old, and it didn't work. We were just too young. There wasn't anybody our age. And so fast forward, I'm probably about 23 and I'm working in a lab. And I asked one of my coworkers for change for the soda machine, and he pulled out change, and in his hand was like this little moose, like pewter token. And I was like, are you in the SCA? He looked horrified. he was like, yes. And I was like,
him.
And I said, are they still active? Do you have like a bigger group? Because now we're 23 and it sounds like a good idea, right? He's like, there's dance practice like every Tuesday night at the university. And I was like, okay. And so I got a hold of Davo. We're still best friends. And I'm like, the SCA is still active. And like the bar scene had gotten a little bit scary in Boise by that time. And we're like, okay, we'll give it a shot. And so we went to dance practice, and it was on campus at Boise State University. And so it was our first time there. And we ran into Conrad, so Duke Conrad, and he was there, and another woman, her name was Jennifer, I think. And the music didn't show up. I mean, we waited like a half an hour, and the music did not show up. And we could have just left. And Conrad was like, well, he just lives over here. You want to come with us? And so we're like, okay. And that was it, like, oh, sure, come on along. And so we went to Lord Alwyn Longwalker at the time, who became Master Alwyn Longwalker. And so we went to his house, got his boombox, came back, and did the dance practice. And the funny thing is so with Conrad, my husband, so before I met Conrad, my husband worked at a comic book store with Conrad. So that was Bill Clemmo in his interview. And so he introduced Conrad to the SCA, and Conrad kind of kept us in the SCA. And then we had all this kind of intertwined stuff. It was kind of cool. We had I think it was a coronet list, or it was a investiture. I think it was an investiture. And we were setting it up, and across the street was Kelly Kennison, was Pasha, Her Excellency Pasha Sterling, or Pasha Starling Mayfair. And she was like, what are you guys doing? Come on over. And we'd known her from high school. And so we came over and we talked to her about it. And she's a Bardic Laurel now. And she was like, oh, that sounds so cool. So she got in. And then she brought her sister in, who's her Grace Cortland, who ended up meeting Conrad. And so like it's this super intertwined group that still today we're all still in we're all still in the same household. We all still play together. Davo has since passed away, which is kind of sad. It's super sad. But that's how we got into it. But the whole thing is like we were all about Halloween and dressing up. And then we found this group of people that was like the same way. So it was all about art. It was all about costumes and boys in armor. That was pretty much it. Because dance practice, we'd gone, and in the beginning it was like, okay, we're having fun. And we'd gone to a coronation for Brian and Anna in the old mill down in Salt Lake. And we get down there and I'd done my outfit. And this was like the kicker, was some of the building had broken down and it would look like battlements.
Oh, cool.
So, and it was all stone. And I was looking down, you couldn't see any cars. And like the wind caught my veil and I was looking on fires, like, you know, down like a, you know, on this open courtyard. And it was like, okay, I'm hooked. And I stuck with it ever since, even though I've had breaks in there when I ended up going to school. So
But
that's
you had
how I started.
you had that transportative moment. Where
Oh
you
yeah.
were in another world.
Yeah, that transcendent, like I am almost there. And I was like, I was totally feeling it. And then I had probably more historical gear then. And then I went, all the people were like, oh no, you look like a sheep herding nun. And so they were like, we must dress you like this. And so then it was all basically Ren Fair, like bustiers and like skirts and stuff. And then I finally kind of fell into Viking Age after that. So that was how I got into the SCA.
We all have to go through some form of bustier thing at some point.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't think that's bustiers are for the young. and then there's that point where you're going, or comfort, or I could be comfortable. And then I was all about when I was little, probably one of the things that I was most excited about, my mom when I was like 8 at the BSU library had gotten me a used anthropology book. And so I carried that book around with me everywhere. And at the same time, and there's pictures later that you'll see, we were doing macrame. And so like, I'll show beads from like the first macrame store that I ever went to. And that was like when I was 6. And so I was making macrame jewelry for the neighborhood kids when I was in grade school. And so that kind of combination of like adornment and like culture was just awesome. SEA kind of like pulls that all together, and you don't really get that anywhere else because it has its own culture. So it was super special, and I still find that fascinating. So anyway,
I have kind of a similar. When I was little, you know, in the 70s, before the Travel Channel, before, you know, the Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom was on, but that was kind of it, right? My grandfather taught at a college, and she used to take me to see travel films at the college.
Oh, that'd be
on,
cool.
You know, different First Nation, you know, uninterrupted, uncolonized cultures. And I was fascinated. And they traveled a lot, and she collected a lot of jewelry and a lot of textiles. And I'm convinced that really, and then my grandfather was really into Arthurian legend and that kind of thing. So I'm convinced that that's really what planted the seed for me too, was childhood experiences like you.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's amazing to like look back at that, and I still have the book. You know, I like out of all the books, I still have this, you know, anthropology, you know, cultural anthropology book that I've carried with me for now, like, I don't know, oh gosh, almost 50 years. That's painful.
You know, right? My college cultural anthropology book is over 30 years old now, and I still have it. So yeah, it's awesome.
It is. That's where I first met my husband. I was in cultural anthropology at Boise State University.
Oh, that's so cool.
It is. He said he would have asked me out if I would have ever showed up to class. That tells you how my first excursion in university went. I was like, okay, well that's fair.
That's awesome. And are you going to school now?
I am going to school now. So I graduated in, I was a lab tech for a long time. So I kind of did it in the reverse way. So I went through, for example, I was a horrible student when I first went to college, and my parents said, we're going to pay for one more year and that's it. I was like, okay. And so I got a vocational technical degree in wastewater treatment. And so I was a wastewater treatment plant operator for about 4 or 5 years. And then I was a laboratory technician for about 16. And then I ended up working for the USDA. But in between there was one point that I was telling my boss she'd sent me back to school to take chemistry classes so I could be in charge of the drinking water. They needed somebody that had enough chemistry for the drinking water standards. And I said to her, I appreciate your sending me back to school, but I can't do both because I was working 40 hours and then I was taking organic chemistry and I just ran out of time. And I was like, I'm going to be doing this till I'm 50. I'm not going to see my husband. And I said, I really appreciate it, but I can't do both. And I remember her looking at me. She goes, well, maybe next semester. And I'm thinking, no, I really can't do both. And I came home and I was like, I talked to my husband. I said, I don't think she hurt me. And I don't know if I could. I was doing 80 hours a week going to school and working. And I was like, I was like totally stressed out. And he was like, well, why don't you go back to school? If you can't do both, why don't you just go back to school? And I was like, really? And so we planned an exit strategy and we saved up for a year. And I went back to school full time in 2008. And that's when I really slowed up on the SCA. And I got my degree in art jewelry, which is now, art metals. And so it's now art jewelry and metalsmithing is what the degree is. Same thing, but they just renamed the program, which is a lot better title. And then I've kind of skipped around, did some library work for a while, decided I really liked working with kids. And so I went back for art education and I'll finish up. Due to COVID, I have my professional year left and that's it. And so I will finish up spring next year for art education.
How exciting.
Yeah, so I'm super excited. I really hope to work in an alternative school, and if I can't do that, working with nonprofits, because working with the library or working with 4-H, I think either one of those would be super cool. Anyway, so I'm almost done. It's just 2 semesters left.
My kids go to a wonderful alternative art school, so just putting that out there.
Really?
And
we're also thinking about moving to Oregon or Washington, so I may ask you about that later.
Yeah, we'll have to talk off camera. We should probably circle back around to the SCA.
Okay.
So you had this totally transcendent moment, your veil blowing in the wind, that kind of hooked you in. When did you start getting into kind of hardcore SCA-centered arts?
I would say, so in 1993, Morgan DeAntioch at the time was Prince, and I just started working in polymer clay, which doesn't sound like hardcore, but at the time it'll kind of wicker in.
Well, in the 90s, instead of doing glass work, a lot of people were doing polymer imitations of period glass. That was totally legit.
Yeah. Everything can be couched with was the 90s.
It was the 90s.
there was a lot of things that were the 90s. So I had started doing polymer clay reproductions of mosaic beads, and then Roman vase beads. And so Morgan had said, I want you to enter arts and sciences. And I'd never considered that. But I was super socially anxious, but I also, like if royalty talked to me, even though, let's be fair, Morgan had been my husband's roommate at one time. So we were already friends, but he was the prince and he told me I needed to compete. And I was like, okay, I must compete. And I competed. I did a whole bunch of beads. I'll have some pictures of the stuff. And I got 10 out of 10 masterpieces. Now keep in mind, this is on a principality level. So those went on to kingdom and I totally got my butt kicked. But that experience was super cool. And for someone who, like me, who was really socially anxious, it was anonymous at the time. And so I could do research. I could get my work out there and I didn't have to talk to anybody. I mean, it was it was like, that was awesome. Um,
Do you just like put your work and the documentation on a table and walk away?
Completely with no name on it. And they couldn't hunt you down. They didn't even know who you were until after like the count was tallied. And it stayed that way up until we turned into Artemisia, until we became Artemisia. So yeah, it was a non, I love that. Cool. And so for me, it was a way of like interacting with people and kind of getting into art and doing art with like then having a purpose. So, and the only reason I started doing the polymer clay beads is I'd started biking for Persona finally, and I'd gotten these beads, but they weren't quite right. They didn't quite cut it. They were 70s beads. I bought them for like $2 at a Raptor Roar, and I was like, these just don't do it. And so I started making the polymer clay beads. And then again, my husband was like, after I'd done polymer clay and I'd done it for like a year and a half, I said, I'd really like to do this, but I don't, like, there was something about glass, and he was like, well, in Ornament Magazine, there was a kit in the back. And he was like, why don't you do glass beads? So he's pretty much my art catalyst, and always it has been. And I was like, okay. And so we got a kit, and that's when it kind of clicked and things kind of switched over, when I went from working in polymer, and that was probably 1994, and I started working in glass. And it was a horrible kit. It wasn't even a hothead. It was, at the time, it was just a brazing torch. They sold you a kit with a brazing torch. It didn't even come with a C-clamp. It came with strips of stainless glass. I don't even know if it was compatible. They sent nichrome wire as your bead mandrel, so it was still curved because it came off the spool, which meant your bead holes were wonky, and the bead release was just kiln wash, so it broke free half the time. So I did that. I had really bad reduction flame, so all my colors were muddy. My bead holes were wonky. My mandrels broke free all the time, and so I did that for a year until I finally saved up for a bench burner, and that was when I kind of shifted over.
And then things went crazy.
Yeah. And still with a lot of the arts and sciences competitions. So that was my thing in the beginning, was all the competitions all the time, because get your work out there and then don't have to talk to anybody. It was great. And my friends who were lovely, who also wore my jewelry, because they were gracious enough that they could, one, wear my work, and two, could talk for me, because they knew I couldn't really normally talk for myself because I was so shy.
That's it's one of the things that we talk a lot about in these interviews, is how do you get your work out there. And not everybody is super gregarious and comfortable with going, look, I made a thing, check it out, and so you have to find workarounds for that. And if you're mentoring people, you need to find workarounds for your people, for whatever their challenges are. And that's really awesome that you fell into a group of people that took care of you like that.
Yes. Yeah. No, they were good to me. They wore all the things, which even some of the bad ones, and I appreciate them for that. Though at the time, I don't know if we knew they were bad, but even some of the bad ones, good for them. Thank you, guys.
Do you have stuff out there that you're like, please throw that away now?
I wouldn't say. I wouldn't say. I still think, because I think work has value in kind of like seeing that progression and that history. But there are some things that I look at and I'm like, there's principality necklaces that I made that are now kind of chains of the state, and I made them in Artemisia. When you're arts and sciences champion, when you step down, you make regalia. And so when I stepped down at one point as Principality Arts and Sciences champion, I made, we had a chains of the state, and they're lovely, but they were later period, right? And so I made these glass beads, and some of the kings and queens, their majesties are still wearing them today, which is super cool. But I would love to get a hold of them because right now they're on a leather thong, and I would really like to at least make them a chain, like just to do a chain for the back. And so that's what I look at is there's some of them that I'm like, if you could just give that to me, I'd restring it and you could wear it again. Maybe I'll ask them if I can do that.
It's a funny thing with regalia. It gets kind of this holy relic status after a certain amount of years. There's a set of banners that I made for our kingdom over 20 years ago, and they're really faded. They weren't super, I mean, they were the best the kingdom had at the time, but they aren't fantastic. But they get used every single court still. And it's like, if I make new ones, will you use those instead?
Oh, yeah. I had a professor at university who there was one time I saw a pot that he had that he liked, and it disappeared one day. It's like, oh, where did that one vase go? I really liked it. He goes, oh, I broke it and threw it away. I was like, but I liked it. He was like, no, you got to speak up, because if anything's bad, I'm going to break it before it goes out. He goes, because people will go through the dumpster. And I had to basically pay off the dean's wife in new work to get my bad work back from her that she'd gone through the dumpster for. And I just remember that, like, he goes, don't ever put work out there that you are embarrassed about. And that, he goes, because you can't get that back. I was like, okay. But he goes, but if you like something, speak up, because if not, I'm going to hit it with a hammer and throw it in the trash can. I was like, okay.
That's a lot of pressure, because you never stop growing as an artist, and you never stop improving your skills. And nothing I make feels perfect. Nothing I make feels worthy, you know?
No, no. There'll be some pictures later on where, you know, it's like it's lopsided. It had a little bit of a reduction flame on it. The bead holes. Okay, right now, if my friends are out there, if you're doing a drinking game, bead holes. So my whole thing is bead holes. Like, so with glass beads, like the super most important thing is the base bead, because if the base bead isn't good, then the rest of it really can never be really that good, right? And so you have to have perfectly rounded bead holes so it doesn't cut strings, just all the way around. And so if it even gets a crease in it, I can't throw it away, but I also can't put it in jewelry. So yeah, that's funny. It's like, I recognize it's bad, and I recognize I'm growing, but it just ends up on this pile of like, you could have been a contender, but now you're not.
Oh, that's awesome. Sarah would like to know, as someone who has sat in Laurel councils for a while, what would you say has changed the most since you first started in the SCA, and as opposed to now, in regards to the Laurel path? And I can read that again if you want me to. That was long.
Yes. I was like, thanks, Sarah. I love you, Mara. Okay, so what has changed in the path? So it's research is easier, just because things were more accessible. So over time, so back in the day, you know, I remember, you know, I only had like 3 books, and you were lucky to come across them. And now you can get books that, you know, have now gone open source and online. There's some Burka books that I just found that are online that were free that I got to download as PDFs, because I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. So I had like Calmer's Beads Trade and Trade Beads, and like History of Beads, and like a few others, but I didn't have a lot of sources. And I was emailing back and forth with Peter J. Francis, who had written some bead books and had done a lot of bead research. but other than that, and also you couldn't communicate really, like I knew I was doing glass beads, and I know other people in other kingdoms were doing glass beads, but I never met them and I never ran into them. And so there wasn't, you couldn't have a Facebook group where you could have this exchange of ideas, which I see is really valuable now. But you were also more free to experiment and kind of like push your own things. And I liked that too, where you were just kind of going rogue and, who's going to tell you you're wrong because no one else is doing it right now, even though they were.
You're
And
the person that knows the most.
yeah, because
there's freedom in that.
Yeah, there's kind of a joy in that. And then the other thing is because of the internet, you can get your work out there a lot more, but then you're also, everything you do lives on forever. So like if you make errors or if there's something hinky or whatever, then that also becomes a challenge, right? So it's a double-edged sword. The internet and social media are to your benefit and you can get your work out there, but they can also be a hindrance.
Do you think that because it's so much easier to research things that we are requiring a more sophisticated level of research than we used to?
I think to a certain degree, but I think that's I think the amount of effort that goes into it is probably the same, but it's probably you're getting a more in-depth piece when you come out of it, because you can bounce those ideas off of, I can belong to jewelry smithing boards that actually are people that have written books or are like giving you advice, and you didn't have that. And so I think probably we are expecting more, but I think the same amount of effort is probably going into that, if that makes any sense. Like I had to hunt down a lot of sources, and like there was a lot of weird emails and weird exchange of ideas. I mean, the fact that I was writing Peter J. Francis, I was like, listen, I have found your bead board, and I was wondering if you could answer, and he was an author. I was like, could you answer my questions? He was at least nice enough that he wrote me back and like answered questions. But for me, like reaching out to like somebody, I was like, could you, but it would also take 2 months before he wrote me back, because he would be on bead research trips, and then it would take a while before he got back to me. So yeah.
And at that point you think you're never going to hear from him, and then all of a sudden you do.
Yeah, which was kind of like Christmas, but up until then you're like, I've offended him.
What did I do wrong?
Oh no.
And now we have people who get on Facebook and instant message you and expect you to, like, if 10 minutes goes by and you haven't given them the answer, they're like, what's wrong?
What'd I do? Yeah, I totally get that.
I'm watching my dog and I'm kind of busy. It's hard to.
He was nice enough to say, hey, I'm going to be out of the country for a while, but sometimes he would leave, and my emails would kind of like fall on deaf ears until he got home.
That's pretty amazing. Should we look at your pictures?
Sure.
Let's do the screen share, Dan.
Let's do, okay. And we've tried this a few times. Okay, let's see how this goes. Oh.
Yay, it's working.
Sweet zombie Jesus. Okay. So like we were talking about, or like I mentioned before, so these were 2 beads that I had from the 1970s. We had a bead store in Old Boise, of course not there anymore, but I just remember these. There was an old piece of macrame that I took them off of, and I still have them, and I just love them. And then my grandmother also had a paperweight collection that I had always been fascinated by glass and like pattern canes in glass, and then bubbles in glass, both of which were like, how'd they get the bubbles in there?
It's so fast.
And I found out how, and it's still cool, but it kind of takes the mystery out of it. And then this is a picture of Davo and my friend that I was talking about, that I first joined the SCA with. And this is also Cortland. So part of that long and twisted tale of everybody meeting everybody, and everyone is still entwined, and we're still all in St. Jude together yeah, to this day.
So great.
I know, isn't that super cool? This is for Conrad's laurel ceremony at Uprising, if I remember correctly. Okay, so this goes to the, and I always like dressing up. So these were these were from, this is me as Professor Sprout, me as Yoda, and me as the Queen of Hearts for a fairy tale ball when I was working as a library associate for a local library, and where I found out I really liked working with kids. I basically did art programming for about 2 or 3 years, and that's why I decided to go back and get my art ed degree. This is Morgan DeAntioch. So Duke Morgan, so when I first started in the SCA, he was the one who said, you need to compete in arts and sciences. He was also my Laurel. He was on my Laurel for about probably a year or a little bit more until I just got, and this is totally on me, I got super stressed out by people because I was anxious, right? So the fact that I wore a green belt that meant people were looking at me all the time did not work for me. So at some point in time, I ended up like giving my belt back because I love Dan and Dan rocks. But yeah, the stress was too much, which is hilarious looking back on it. But you know, it's real. I just had to go on my own path. And literally, I was saying, wow, this is a nice lock. He has a locking mechanism on this reliquary, and it is super cool. Anyway.
And he made that?
And he did that. He made that reliquary, and he has and it's even gold plated, which is super cool. And it has a super cool locking mechanism, which I wish you could see. That's like all wooden and the key works. Anyway, it makes me totally happy. He was, like I said, he was my husband's roommate at one point in time. We lived next to each other in Nampa, and he started off as, he's an armor smith now, but he started off as an illustrator in the Army. And he also did miniatures. So he worked for miniature companies. This is St. Jude, which is the household I belong to. That it's the household of Conrad and Cortland. Their grace is Conrad and Cortland. And it's the main thing, since my husband quit playing, he hasn't played probably since about 2 years in. We met each other in the SCA. And shortly after we you know, like got married and stuff, there was one night we were going to go to Uprising, and it's been like 3 of these events where I get packed up and he's like, I don't feel good, I can't go. And I packed for like a day and a half, and it's like 10 o'clock the night before the event, and he's like, I don't feel good, I don't think I'm gonna go. And I was like, dude. And I remember laying in bed and like tossing around, and it's dark, right? So you can always say whatever you want when it's dark. And I rolled over and I said, I'm feeling really resentful and kind of, you know, like I said, I really still want to go to the event. Are you cool? I said, I don't want to, you know, be upset with you. You know, I know you don't feel good, but you know, do you mind if I go? He was like, no, that's cool, you can go. And so that was kind of like my solo journey in the SCA, which pretty much was about 2 years in. And so if it hadn't been for St. Jude and all the people in St. Jude, I don't know if I would have continued to play. And so this is a lovely picture of all of our snubbery walls, which are pretty much, that's my arms, but it ends up being our snubbery walls. So Carrie had let me have that for this. And then Duchy Blackheart, which for Grace, Isabel, and I have been coming to Ontier now. So I just recently found out you could get a battery for your CPAP. This was like 2 years ago. I have been to, I don't know, 6 on-tier camping events. I think this was Acorn War, where we drove 10, 11 hours to come to a Shire event. I don't care. I'll come to on-tier to camp for anything. It's like super fun. And it's like, I have a battery, I can travel anywhere. So anyway, they've been very gracious in hosting us whenever we come to on-tier.
Awesome.
I know, it's been super fun. and there's a novelty in coming to another kingdom because it's a different culture and you don't have any responsibilities. And so it's a lot like it was when you first started in the SEA, at least it has been for me. And it kind of got me like restarted and re-excited about being in the SEA again.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best treatments for burnout is go to another kingdom and meet another group of people, and it reminds you what you love about your group of people.
Yeah, I mean it's a total game changer. Yeah, I'd recommend it to anyone. It's super cool.
In fact, your household, my visit to your household, it's not last year because last year doesn't count at all. Before, totally reinvigorated me.
Oh yeah,
I owe you guys big time. So.
Oh yeah, I remember meeting you at Carrie's, and that was super fun and geeking out in the backyard, which was totally awesome. So this necklace over here on the left those were the beads that I found for $2 at Raptor War, and this was my attempt at my first Viking necklace. And you fake it till you make it, and hey, it's kind of close. It was the 90s. And I still think, hey, it has merit. And the brooch strands over on the right here, I made for Cortland really early on, and they're amber nut and they're bone, but they're really indicative of some of the things that you could have found in period, and I like that. And I think it's accessible because there's a lot of people when they first start out, you can't always make your own glass beads, but you can find things that are pretty close and kind of work your way up.
I think that's a great piece.
Yeah, it's super fun, and I lucked out on the bone beads. This was one of the first pieces for that Principality ANS that Morgan said I should compete in, and it's based on a late 9th century rock crystal and carnelian necklace. But I think this, for being relatively new, I think this did pretty well on close proximity. I'm pretty happy with the wire wrapping.
Yeah.
And so this belongs to Pasha. So anyway, I'm happy that she still has it. I'm happy it's still alive and kicking. She's moved a couple of times and she was able to find it. So thank you very much, Pasha, for looking for that for me. So anyway, speaking of polymer clay, this was the necklace that Morgan was like, I want you to compete. And it's a relatively close proximity to the one that was found in Enum, Norway. I mean, I got down to where I measured in History of Beads. They even had like a diameter of one of the beads, and I like calculated out what the sizes were for each bead based on that, and did like a conversion ratio, and I figured out what they were. I would say that the colors aren't as crisp as I would have wanted because I didn't understand that Fimo got darker when you baked it. So I got better at color matching.
That is some next level Fimo skill. I mean,
I super liked Fimo. I really like polymer clay a lot. And
that's like, damn girl, that's really, really good work.
So I did Roman face beads. I was super excited about Roman face beads, and I got better with the color mixing. So I got where, for example, like, if you wanted red to come out, you mix a little bit of yellow in it. Don't mix white in it or it goes pink. I'll just tell you that now. Don't go there. And a little bit of white in with the blue, a little bit of white in the yellow, and then it'll stay crisp. I made a lot of site tokens. The suns were button covers for a coronation dress for, I think, Alan and Coruscant, I think is what they ended up being. Let's see.
These are great.
Yeah. And I don't know whatever happened to that other. I had another picture in there. Well, there we go. So right around 94 is when I started going from like polymer clay to glass. And so I wanted to include this one. So if you don't have the means, because so it's polymer clay and I get it. but there's ways you can get really inexpensive beads now. And if you pay really close attention, so the two on the outside and in my hand on the right side, those are both polymer clay, and the one in the middle is glass, is acid edge glass. So you can get close. I mean, if you kind of like pay attention, you can pass a 10-foot rule. And
I would have guessed the other way around. I would have guessed the middle was polymer clay and the outside were glass, because
yeah,
you've got a glass looking sheen on the polymer. That's amazing.
yeah. So I mean, and those were really early on. And I don't really want to, say, hey, you should dedicate your life to polymer clay. But we have people working in acrylic paints and not necessarily all period pigments, and people are working on Bristol board and not. And if it gets people researching, and if it gets people excited about art and starting down that path, hey, do some starter things. Get your feet wet, do your research, and kind of grow from there. Because I think it's really important to meet people where they are and kind of like raise them up from there. And so if they're goofing around with things, hey, have fun.
There's nothing wrong with a gateway drug.
No, definitely a gateway drug. So the ones on the left are my first beads. So these were the beads with the bad nichrome wire, the horrible torch, and this red one. I love this. So the red one, I heated it so much that I burned all the. So it's soda lime glass, and if you overheat it for too long, you burn the sodium off, and sodium's working as a flux, right? So then it raises the melting temperature and it devitrifies. And so I heated that sucker for like an hour, and I tried to get it to melt again, and it just got weird and kind of like crystalline on the outside and started to shrink in on itself as the outsides, like melting temperature went up and the interior stayed the same. And then you're like, oh, it's a horrible bead. And the black turned gray. But it's important to know where you came from. And that was a really bad year. I'm surprised I stuck with it, because it was a year. You can see I got this bead too close to the torch. So I have a lot of bubbles. This bead devitrified. This bead, it was a reducing flame, and so all the whites went gray. Okay, this is 2 beads in or 1 bead leaves. These are all rejects for one reason or the other. This one, the dots are poorly spaced. I can tell you these, they have bad bead holes. Bad bead holes. These are some really super cool bubble beads, but they aren't really historical in any way, shape, or form. You can see where the gray has, you can see where my cursor is. Can you, or can you not?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sweet. So you can see where the glass color is reduced. It's got that gray smudge on it, and so that's not good. This was one of my first attempts at doing a cane in glass, and you can't even tell it's a cane, but I tried. So anyway, those are a lot of my rejects. There you go.
But I mean, I don't know. There are rejects in period too, right? So maybe they're lower class beads.
Well, and you can tell they're rejects, but I haven't thrown them out.
Okay, good.
So I still have them. I strung those from a box of like all of my beads. It's like, oh, I loved you at one time, but you still didn't make the cut, but I can't throw you out. So there you go. I did a website in like 95 to 96. It has now made its way onto Pinterest, because it made it onto the Viking Answer Ladies webpage at one point in time, like back in the 90s. So these beads up here are now forever linked to every Viking Age Pinterest, Mistress Agnes. And I was like, so you were asking, right? Is there ever something you want to redo? These beads right here. These beads in the upper left-hand corner, because they will be forever linked with my name. And I made them in about 1995. But hey, there you go. But I included this one. So I had this website, but I don't do commissions well, because you're trying to match what's in somebody's head. And I'll make like 3 times the amount of beads, instead of having someone fall in love with a piece and go, oh, I love it, and taking it and buying it and loving it forever. So I kept this bead site up, and I did so until somebody commissioned a piece, and I sent it to them, and they wrote me, and they were like, I love it, it's perfect. I was like, score. I was like, that's like, you know, the holy grail. It was wonderful. She loved it. She didn't want anything changed. And I took my website down. I was like, because commission work was just stressing me out too much. But it was like, thank you for loving that necklace. And now if I sell anything, I'll sell it at merchant tables, or I'll do an auction. But there's this bead right here. This is gold foil bead, and that comes up a little bit later. I made a bunch of gold foil beads for the principality. These were necklaces that, thank you, Conrad and Cortland, for being my supporters and wearing my early period beads. These are strung on wire, and you'll notice a lot of my earlier work was strung on wire. It's interesting. When I first started, silver was cheap. My beads were cutty, like they had bad bead holes, and so they cut string. I got out of that relatively quickly, but you know, wire kind of kept them from breaking. And then I went to where I was stringing it on sinew, and I did an arts and sciences competition, and I actually had two of my judges that were Laurels that were like, they didn't string beads on sinew in period, they strung them on wire. And so it was like, I don't know, 2 years that I made beads, and everything was on wire. Until I wrote Peter J. Francis, and I was like, you know, is it really strung on wire? Because I said, you know, they're found loose in grave sites. And he's like, no, it probably would have been organic material. He goes, you know, think sinew, think wool. He goes, but there, you know, a lot of times it rots. He goes, but there's an extant piece in Egypt that had linen, that they found linen inside. And I was like, oh, okay. And so that kind of shifted, you know, my mindset. But and what's cool about that is like, okay, so you have these necklaces and they're strung on wire. But then that becomes kind of like the lore of the SCA and the culture of the SCA and how it kind of moves. I find that fascinating anyway. It's like, you know, a queen will wear a Byzantine dress and then everybody's wearing Byzantine, and it has like this kind of like flow. So it is what it is. So early period Agnes beads are on wire, much like this one. So
SCA has myths like that. When I first started, I was making a lot of jewelry, and I was into seed beads. And I had a late period Laurel tell me that there are no seed beads in period, which is incorrect, but I believed her. And so I put the seed beads aside. And you have to be careful about whose words you take as gospel, and do your own research. And if you think you're right, back yourself up with your research and be right.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, it definitely, I mean, you know, it changed my work, and it was, you know, really good when I finally got to that stage where you say, no, I'm good with this. And so anything I do now is strung on waxed linen, which is super strong. And then I hand knot in between each beads. This is Eight and Belt ANS. This is one of the pieces that I entered. These were Phoenician head beads, and so this one right here is one that I entered in competition. Oh, do you?
I love these so much.
And so this is, so one of the things, like I was going to come and visit you, and we'll talk about that later, because I wrote a grant to come to Ontier and kind of visit artisans up and down the I-5 corridor. Is that you do Scythian art, and I love the fact that, you know, you were doing stuff that like pretty much predated period, or what is considered period for SCA things. And so I did a lot of these earlier period beads, except for I was discouraged from doing them because they predated period. And after a while, I just it was hard to like try to justify my earlier period stuff, right? I found a Roman face bead on a Frankish necklace, and I kept doing the faces for a while because I was like, I found it. It was in period. It still counts. But a lot of the other stuff I kind of veered away from. And now anymore, I'm like, what you gonna do? Glass is glass. It exists. You know, it persists from time, you know, throughout history. I might go back and try these again because they're super fun.
I also made glass beads in the
Ooh,
late
let's go
90s.
back.
And these, I never was able to make, my skill was never such that I could make these, but I have researched them and I'm totally obsessed with them. I think they're really, really cool. But I have had people say, when evaluating other glass artists, their work is fantastic. Their skill level is, you know, they're totally there, but they make early period beads. They don't make period SCA period beads. And so I don't think they should be recognized as a laurel. And I'm like, watch me get ragey. That's not okay.
No, and that's one of the things. I mean, at least with glass, I could document some of the things being carried forward and like worn in period. And I will say that I always used an oxypropane torch. And so mine was more about a period aesthetic and what people may have worn, and not necessarily about reproducing how they were made. Now, did I research how they were made? Yeah. Did I have room in my backyard, or did I have the wherewithal to build my own furnace? No. Still want to try, but I love me my oxypropane torch, and I like experimenting. I like making the things that I wear. So if you're one of my friends, you'll know this one. So for arts and sciences, that there was one arts and science competition that I was working on, and this is not the frog bead, but this is my first Principality ANS that I won, where literally my husband packed the PC up in the car. I didn't have all my documentation done. Here's something, document your stuff before you make it, and then you're not writing your documentation until 5 o'clock in the morning, the day of the competition. That's a good idea, because I was looking for the Gideon Bible, and I was like, frogs are period, see Bible, plague, or frogs. Literally, it was like half a paragraph, and that was my documentation. It was like so bad, so bad. But then I was really super happy with this bead, which again predates period, but it's a Hallstatt bead that I was super excited about. I normally don't do beads that big anymore, but pretty cool bead. These were for, what does it say? Artemisian Kingdom ANS. And so this is the Artemisian Kingdom ANS. Was it 97? Oh, actually it was 98. That's a typo. Where instead of competing with, I was trying to figure out how to up my game. And so in most of my beads had been individual beads that I'd competed with. And so I competed in this one where I did 5 full strands and necklaces, hollow core or a core form vessel where I did the glass, build up on a core form. I did a cane, so I did a face cane, and I did face cane beads. And so I wanted to, and I love this one, but there's a lot of waste when you make these. And again, they predated period, so there's a lot of dog boning. And so it took about a pound of glass to make about 10 beads. But I'd taken a class from Lawrence Stump, and I don't know if you're familiar with Lawrence Stump. He does beautiful cane work, and he taught in Portland, and we saved up and we sent me to Portland, and I had like a 2-day class with him. It was a game changer. I hadn't had a class from anyone, and so it was about 2 years in, and he has one of his beads is in the Smithsonian. He does just beautiful cane work, which this is not, but he practices a lot, and I'd love to go back and try it again, because I like the polymer clay so much.
Yeah.
Okay, so in that arts and sciences competition, so I won that. I won Atenvelt's last competition before we became Artemisia, and then I won the Artemisian Arts and Sciences competition for the first Artemisian Arts and Science Kingdom Arts and Science competition, and that's where I got my laurel. So I didn't have a vigil, and I didn't have like the stereotypical laurel ceremony, but I would like you to note right here, these are my brooches, which are 2 site tokens. Because I'd spent all of my time and all of my focus on making glass beads, so much so that notice I'm not even wearing my own glass beads. And then someone came up to me at the event, and this is kind of an example of what happens when you become a Laurel. And they were like, "You are the picture of the perfect Viking persona." And I was like, "Oh gosh, I am so not." I'm wearing Birkenstocks. You can see my little tabby apron. I'm wearing a dish towel on my head. Seriously, so far and away from the perfect vision. I am wearing a really super cool bracelet by William Bjornson or Bill Dawson. And I had purchased that from him at 30 year because we both were merchanting in the same barn. But right after that, after they said that to me, we went to Duke Torgel, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. My husband got me these brooches for Christmas because I realized I didn't have brooches. I wasn't wearing my own beads. I made the beads, and then William Wild, who does swords now for the Ren Fair circuit, and he won the Atlanta Blade Fair at one point with one of his swords. And so I consider myself really lucky to have this one Laurel medallion because he was at a local Ren Fair, and like no one was going to buy a Laurel's medallion in a local Ren Fair except for me. And so it was super cool. I was like, score. Okay, so
did you? I kind of want to go back and talk about that pressure of all of a sudden you're a model Viking because you got laureled for glass bead making.
yeah.
Did that freeze you out a little bit? Did it kind of?
I don't know if it paralyzed me. I will say, so Aldwin Longwalker, Master Aldwin, who by the way got me into Starfire back in the day. And so
That's scruffy.
Yep, it is scruffy. So at one point in time, he said, do you feel any different? And I guess that was his stereotypical question that he would ask people, because people would be like, no, I don't. He's like, see, it doesn't. And he came up and asked me after I got my Laurel. He's like, do you feel any different? I was like, yes. He was like, what? I was like, no, the pressure is gone. and that lasted for a hot minute until I realized it was just a whole different kind of pressure. Kind of like, and not like a bad pressure, but it was just different. And I realized, no, I had to concentrate on my garb more. And I wasn't really worried about what I was going to, say, because I wasn't really vocal to people anyway a lot of times. So that wasn't a big deal. But it did change. It changed the way I played. And I stopped making things that were earlier period a lot of the time. And then I stopped competing, which was really interesting. So that was the way I'd interacted in the SCA for a really long time. So like I done 2 Principality ANSs and a Brewery ANS, and I won 2 Kingdom ANSs and an Australia Warpoint. And then for some reason, after that, I felt weird about competing, which I don't think I should have, but at the time I did. And so I would only compete in one category. Like I felt like, because that was my vehicle for my renown, I felt like it wasn't appropriate for me to take that vehicle for someone else's renown away. Not like I could win every single one of them, because you can't.
Right.
But I would compete as like an example, like, hey, this is the way I would normally compete, but I would only do like one piece.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how my game changed, which is kind of weird. And so yeah, that's how it changed. I don't, but the pressure, that weird, like people staring at you pressure, yeah, a lot of that went away, and that seemed to, Scruffy was kind of like, what? I just love that. Awesome.
So you wrote a TI article.
Yeah. So I wrote a TI article on Viking mosaic beads from polymer clay. You're welcome to all you people out there who may have had bad polymer clay running around in your Principality or your Barony. It's Hey, I still think, if it gets you trying things, what the heck? I am all about the creative in the creative anachronism. And I'm all about, as much as I love history, I'm also almost as excited or more excited by the SCA culture and how different kingdoms kind of interact and how different cultures kind of like grow up within the SCA. So I'm almost interested in the culture of the SCA as much or more as in history, which is kind of weird for me to say as a Laurel, but it super excites me anyway. So what?
The SCA culture is fascinating.
Oh, it's awesome. And I love like how each kingdom has its own thing, and I love the fashion trends that kind of go around. And so no, it's super cool. So this TI article I wrote before I was elevated. But they kept it on a back burner, and then a year after I was elevated, this article came out. And I was horrified. Because I kind of moved on from that stage, not to mention all of my contact information was wrong because we moved. And so if you tried to contact me, if you had any questions, or if you tried to say, gosh, why have you done this article? I'm sorry, you couldn't get in touch with me. But now looking back, it's kind of super exciting that it actually got out there. But you can see my I don't know what I did the graphics in, but those are the graphics that it was the 90s. That's what we're gonna say. It was the 90s. It was the 90s. So instead of arts and sciences competitions, the thing that I kind of focused on after that, after stepping away from those, is I did Raptor War prizes. So this is from 2002 and 2005. This was based on a Danish piece. I think that ended up going to Floki. This piece, I think Conrad won. In fact, I know Conrad won because Carrie still gave me a picture of it. This was largesse for Conrad and Cortland going to Penzik for the West. So I made them for the West Kingdom. And even though I didn't use the cane work for face beads anymore, I used the cane work to do beads in Viking beads. So I mean, it's still carried over, and even some of the patterns and stuff and what I learned in polymer clay kind of carries over when you're kind of building things in that 3D form. This was Raptor War Prize 2017, and this was based off a Roos necklace. And I really love the colors in this one. Has a couple gold leaf beads up at the top. As much as I like doing prizes, what you run into with prizes is they may not match the persona of the person who wins. And I get sad if they're going to sit in a drawer. So I would prefer doing auction necklaces because then the person wanted it. Originally, I did trades and auctions, and I would let people pick whatever colors they wanted. And that's a mistake. At least a mistake for me. Because I had one guy and he picked, I don't know, like 10 or 15 colors. I was like, I don't know how this is going to work. So now I give people 3 colors. And then I choose like a neutral. And then it's easier for one, they're colors that that they're really kind of tied to. And then it's just easier to kind of work or design around it. So this is for Hogar. I think Master or Hawkmood Braden had gotten this for Hogar for when he got his pelican. So I made that necklace for him. And I couldn't get this one then until I got my ventilation. And thank you, Gabe, because you're awesome. And you put my ventilation in my shop. And I love you, man. Speaking of Gabe, yay, Gabe. So speaking of Gabe, he did this Laurels medallion. And so pretty much what he did is he commissioned this necklace for my Sarah, his girlfriend. And he traded me another medallion and pretty much my coronet. He also made my coronet.
And my bracelets.
And so the sneaky thing we did for the necklace is I started a YouTube channel where we had a online class, and I did a YouTube video on bead basics. So look up Agnes of Whitby on YouTube. I have 2 videos there, only 2 because I boogered up my elbow and haven't been able to make anything more. There will be more coming on like soldering and other stuff later. But what we did is, since Sarah was my first subscriber, I totally said, hey, Sarah, since you were my first subscriber, do you want to help me design the necklace? And she was like, yeah. I was like, okay, cool. It's a total hook. So I let her pick all the colors. She picked like the design and everything else. I picked, 3 patterns, 3 colors or whatever. And so she pretty much designed her own necklace, and I just kind of built it with the colors and patterns of his inspiration, which was super sneaky. And I made a video of me making it. And so making this, it was, how do I make, it's a video on how I design. So, how I get inspiration, where I find my beads, how do I portion them out, and how I kind of like go about the design process. A little less on how I make the beads, but a little bit more on the process. So people in beads. So if you have beads, you have to have people wearing them. This is Sophia, so Pasha's daughter and Cortland's niece. And
she's a little bit older than that now.
She is. So she just graduated college, and she's just applying to graduate school. So that is true. Cortland said this was when she was going through her photography phase, and so she has an old school camera with her, which is super fun. And this is, I love this picture. So this is Her Excellency Varia and Lily. So that's Conrad and Cortland's daughter and Pasha's niece. And so it's just super cute. And what baby doesn't love these? So this is another auction piece. Antonia chose red, white, and blue. And I ended up making this for, and I probably made this for somewhere in the 90s. And Antonia was also my apprentice. She was supposed to get elevated. She asked me to be her Laurel. I was like, don't you think it'll reset you? She's like, no. She'd already been discussed. She'd already passed circle. I knew she'd already passed circle. And I was like, really? And so, but she'd been discouraged, and I get it. We all knew she'd passed circle. She'd come to an uprising, to a Laurels prize tourney, and no one had talked to her because they were talking to the other artists because they already knew she was going to get elevated. But this goes to 2 things. One, even though you may pass circle, it's still, you're advising the crown, and you don't know when that's going to happen. And 2, talk to the artisans even though you think they're going to pass circle, so they don't get frustrated. So she asked me, and I spoke to the order and said, hey, she's a little, and I totally get it. Like, none of us talked to her. I don't want this to reset her, but I'm going to take her as my apprentice, and then they'll elevate her that evening. So we thought it was like the best of both worlds. And so they were like, oh, okay. And then something happened, like the crown didn't show up, or, maybe there wasn't a scroll. So I made her my apprentice, and then she was elevated about 3 months later. But still, my apprentice, one hot minute. So this is the Principality Regalia necklace. So this is the necklace right here. I would like you to note Floki at this time. This is his coronation. He is giving a pelican, or offering a pelican to Duke Conrad at the time. He has come back from hell in this picture. And so I love this because this is zombie Floki.
Like, do you have some makeup on or something?
He does. He's come back from the dead. So all of his court had, like, they had somebody who had done theatrical makeup. So they had like circles under their eyes and blood. And so anyway, it was a whole zombie court, which the theatrics gave me great amounts of joy. But this necklace right here, each one of those beads, the gold beads, had 2 sheets of gold leaf on it. That's when gold was cheaper. I only had 1 kiln that didn't have a kiln controller. I will say, if you ever do glass beads in the future, get a kiln controller, it'll save you from this. It had a pyrometer. So I would anneal by sitting next to the kiln and turning it on and off for the next 8 hours and slowly ramping down the temperature. It didn't even have a set point, so you'd have to turn it on and off to keep the temperature kind of like. But he's sweet enough. He and Guinevere, they actually were the necklaces, and the fact that they're still getting wear. Those are from probably 96.
Nice.
Those are the ones I want to put chains on. This is Sarah wearing her super sneaky necklace.
Yay!
Yay, Sarah. This is Hogar. This is his auction necklace. This is some of my early metal work. So I did this, chain with like the ear spoon and the tweezers. Tweezers actually work. And then I took one metalsmithing class at BSU, and then I'd been in contact with Bill Dawson for 10 years after 30 year. And I managed to drive over. If he's still offering classes, they're awesome. And I took a 5-day workshop on ancient metalsmithing from him. And so this ring, pretty much I did all the bead wire, the beading on it, and the beading on the bezel. He pretty much helped me with the soldering because I wasn't really good at soldering at the time. I think he bent one side, I bent the other. So it was definitely a collaborative piece, but super, super exciting and fun. And I want to do this again. I actually got the bead wire tools. They're all ready to go. But we're waiting on that.
He's amazing. He's such an incredible artist and such a patient teacher.
Oh, he was super cool. I mean, he went to the extent he put tents outside for us. We learned all historical techniques. He had like historical water pictures, like in the ground and like evaporating to cool the water. And then the next day we went inside and worked in his studio. And every day after we got, done with work, we'd walk across the interstate, walk across I-5 and like go to, there's a bakery. I hope the bakery is still there, and we'd go have baked goods and then we'd come back. And so it's super cool. So like I said, at one point I went back to school, started taking metal classes in 2005, part-time, and full-time in 2008. And I left a lot of my contemporary work. So camiruclemo.com is where my contemporary work is, which is a lot of plastic and a lot of mica. But even my contemporary work has ties to history, so I tried to pull in the most historical ones.
Was it weird to transition from doing historical-based work and all of the constraints that you have on your material usage and your design when you do historical work, and then have the whole kind of, how was it to transition into modern work where those things were not part of the formula?
It was interesting. So the constraints, the constraints were there, but they were just different. So I was discouraged from doing anything historical. And it was, more conceptual. And so my program was based a lot on conceptual work. And so it was interesting. The constraints are there, but they've just shifted, and you really had to know your why. So if I was going to do anything or use any material, I really had to have my the Annika Smolovitz, who's the head of the art metals program at Boise State University, is definitely into the non-neutrality of materials. And that is one of her major theories behind her work. And so if you're going to do a piece in lead versus if you're going to do a piece in gold, what is that saying about your piece? And what does that say about, how it interacts with the body? And so there were constraints, but the constraints were different.
These are beautiful.
Thank you. So they're relatively big. They're typically about 3 inches across. One's in copper, one's in sterling silver. They both have gold foil kumbu, which is you take a sheet of gold foil and on a hot plate on depletion gilded silver, or fine silver, you just kind of like rub with a burnisher, and it kind of like alloys or kind of like sinks into the surface. And if you keep heating it, the gold will slowly kind of like disappear and kind of like work its way into the metal. Excuse me. But it's a really nice way to get like 22 karat gold effect on top of your silver. So this is a reliquary with an insect egg or insect leg. I did a series of 12 cockroaches. So a lot of my work was based around wastewater, animals that live in and around waste, so wastewater microbes, cockroaches. And so anyway, these were both really fun pieces. I did 12 of these, 13 of these.
Wow.
Yes. Hydraulic diform. Totally love hydraulic diforms. This is a memory reliquary. So even though I'm doing contemporary pieces, you can see that there's still some historical influences in my work. And so these were started out as 2 sheets of copper that I raised, and then this is wood and then glass beads.
Wow.
And it's about the size of a pomegranate. I tried to get it, originally I tried to do a realistic shape, and that wasn't working, and I just ended up shaping it round because I could get them to fit together easier. This has nothing to do with anything in history whatsoever. But I wanted to show it because all the pin stems on the cockroach brooches pop open so they have antenna. So I really tried to do that.
Those are great.
Oh, let's see. So this is, so again, you know, this was a swap piece. Oh dear God, these were the most heinous things. So we all cast a piece. We all picked a piece of toy that we got out of like a candy machine. It was a casting class. We all cast, you know, like 10 different, you know, 10 versions of whatever it was. Mine were baby doll arms. And then everyone swapped. So I got a daisy, a lizard, and a piece of pizza. And so I did this lizard with a lace ruff, admiring this pizza. There's a ruby that's set on the back, which is really odd, but that's what you get for a swap piece. This one, I like the fact that, you know, I went to Penland to do contemporary practices, and I still managed to find a tin that had people in like folklore costumes. And so that was like one of the pieces I did on scholarship when I was at Penland. Again, this has nothing to do with history, but this is George the Tiny Button Monster, who was one of the pieces that I did right before I graduated. Most of my graduation work was cast, still that hydraulically diformed, but it was cast resin or silicone. It was plushy, and they were all microorganisms. But every year we did auction pieces, and I love this guy, but you auction them off for the program. But my mother-in-law, who I adore, let me tell you, I love my mother-in-law, outbid my professor for this piece, so, and gave it to me as my graduation present.
Oh.
So I still have George, and all of the buttons, literally when it says grandma's buttons, they were buttons for my grandma's button box. So anyway, again, a reliquary. So this is, I have had a love-hate relationship with fast food for a long time. So this is called Devotion. It's a McDonald's French fry, which still, what is it, 2010? 10 years, it still hasn't changed shape. It hasn't molded, it hasn't done anything. It just sits there. So I took a russet potato. I took a mold off a russet potato. And then I took the rays are molds I took off of plastic toy McDonald's French fries to make the rays on the reliquary, and I recycled candlestick. But the thing I was proudest about, so I made a little glass dome, and then it has a little LED light battery packet inside, so it actually lights from inside, and it has this like internal glow. And so this got into Boise Weekly and into a show on sustenance in my senior show, so it was super cool.
That's awesome.
So I did a lot of hand building. So most of my stuff is contemporary and hand building. So these are 2 mixed media teapots that I did. And this is Raku, and Raku is probably my favorite thing because I like the color changes and the mystery. But it's not very durable, so I find that kind of frustrating. But still, the colors make me very happy. This is very dry burgundy, and both of these are the same glaze. Just different things wrapped around them.
Your work is so whimsical. I just love it.
Well, thank you. Pretty much, and so I address a lot of really heavy topics through whimsy, and I find it makes it more approachable. But yeah, I never have gotten into like doing really super serious work. These are my functional pieces, and as much as I take pictures of functional pieces. So I was the shop assistant for my professor for 6 semesters, his studio assistant. So I did all his kiln firings and made all his glazes and mixed all his clay. But he wouldn't allow me to take a throwing class from him because he said I could teach myself on my own. So I basically begged him until finally the semester he was retiring. He's like, okay, fine. And so I took it over the summer from him. And so this was the pieces on this side were the pieces that I made from the one throwing class that I got to take from him. And now I'm taking from, so that was Ron Taylor. Now I'm taking from Carolyn Early. Since she was like the transitional professor, she was the professor that took his job after he left. She's letting me kind of come in and work in the studio as long as I volunteer. So as soon as the pandemic's over, I'll go back to doing that. And now we're coming around to the end. So we touched on briefly. So last year, I wrote a grant as part of my arts entrepreneurship minor to kind of bring, this kind of culminates everything. So I'm walking these two paths, and this kind of came out when I was working in my arts entrepreneurship classes, where I have this, historical reenactment past and all of these jewelry and these pieces and these skill sets that come from that. And then I'm also doing contemporary work. And then, I was taught that whole time that you really need to leave those historical techniques behind. And then when I got into the arts entrepreneurship class, they were like, no, this is like a skill set that actually makes you unique and different and set apart from a lot of the other people. Like when you're trying to sell your work, you should really explore that. And so I ended up writing a grant for the Alexa Rose Grant Foundation, where I was going to travel the I-5 corridor, stay for 2 months, learn from you. You got me talking with Rin Thompson, correct? And is it Arian the Wanderer? I don't know how to pronounce his. Arian. So
that's how I say it. I that's probably not right because it sounds much like Aryan. So yeah.
Well, I can't pronounce things anyway, and I've met everybody online, so I've never heard them say their names. So I don't know. So I managed to work out like this whole schedule of like traveling the I-5 corridor, and I was going to stay with Kaya and Almeric and kind of like do this whole study thing for 2 months, and then the pandemic hit. But I was awarded the grant, and they allowed me to rewrite my grant for expenditures for studios and then do online classes. So this torch, which is that Bobcat, is the one that works on super low gas pressures. And you saw those really bright colors that I got in Sarah's necklace.
Yeah.
That's the torch that allowed me to do that. And so I've been super happy with that. And then this is my studio that I'm kind of reworking right now, where half the tools I had before, but half the tools I got were hammers. And what was funny is, and so we talked about this. So right as we were coming up, like on now, I was going to have 8 months off. And I figured I could do a lot of online classes and work with Arian and work with you and work with Rin. And then I'd wickered in that, Luis Garcia was also going to help me and work with me. I was going to do a whole thing. I'd gotten this adorable little stump anvil and these hammers from like the Massimir find, and they were reproductions out of Sweden. It was going to be awesome. And my husband and I went out, and I was going to get stumps. You can see them, the offending stumps right under this bench right here. And I had my husband there so he could lift the heavy stuff. I pushed on one, and I ruptured the tendon to my bicep. And so I'm now on that kind of recovery path. And so I don't get to hammer things till April. But I still get to hammer things. We've had surgery. Everything's going to be good. I got to clean the studio. But that's kind of where we are now. I'm kind of in this holding pattern. And I can now lift 10 pounds. But I have all these hammers and I can't touch them. I was like, oh, this is like cruel. But anyway.
And pet them.
Look at them lovingly.
Caress them. Hold them.
They are my, yes. And I've done some caressing. And then my husband's like, no, quit touching the hammers back inside. So anyway, there we go.
Well, April will come really fast. I mean,
Yeah.
It won't, but it will, right?
Oh, it super will. Well, and the fact that, it's kind of injury that they expect a full recovery on. So I'll be able to hammer again, and that's all I actually really cared about. So
good. That's awesome.
I'm getting froggy.
You've been talking a lot. It's awesome.
I have been super chatty.
Is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to talk about?
I don't know. Oh, there was a book I wanted to bring up.
Excellent.
Okay. So, it'll be weird, but that's okay. So, Creating Makers, which is a library programming book by Megan Egbert out of Meridian Public Library. And it goes into kind of that maker mindset of, the people that go out and search for learning's sake, and how leaving projects open-ended, which I think was the joy of the SCA when I first got into it in the 90s, where you didn't have all those resources and you could leave it more open. Or if you did early period and you didn't have a lot of pictures, who was going to tell you you couldn't experiment with this, or you couldn't try that because, okay, well, you could try almost anything. And so it goes into, like, instead of saying to someone, make a car that goes as far as you want it to, have something that says, make something that moves. And I think the SCA, in a way, for historical reenactment groups, is the group that says, make something that moves. Because it allows you to find whatever jam you want to get into, whatever persona you want to look at, whatever period you want to look at. Doesn't say your kit, it says an attempt at the pre-17th century. But it allows that freedom, that kind of historical Comic-Con kind of creative feel, that allows people to find their like happy place, that I think that makes the SCA really special. And reading that book kind of brought me back to that space. Like, this is why I love the SCA, because you can find whatever you want and like totally geek out on it and totally be happy about it.
It's one of the things that one of the things I've done this year is I've taken on 3 students, and I'm really hesitant to, like, as they're starting to explore different mediums, to like put down these like strict period restrictions on them. I don't do that. I'm like, play with it, see what it does for you. Don't.
Well, and in period, do you think, so the Egyptians had cannons and different periods, it had like very specific things that you had to, but artisans in period were pushing their materials, seeing what they could get away with, seeing what worked,
they were making up tools to do what they wanted to.
Oh yeah, totally. So I totally love that idea. And on the topic, yeah, I don't have any apprentices right now. I do have one apprentice. I have Ulrich, Baron Ulrich. He is a lovely human. He's making a lot more things with his church now. And I think that's a blessing. I think he's found a place where he's really happy. He's doing a lot of writing, but he's not highly active in the SCA. And he's my only apprentice right now. But I think I'd be the same way if I got a student. Closest thing I have is Gabriel and I, like Sir Gabe, who let's be fair, he will work with anyone, with anything. So he's been coming over, and his excitement about the arts has made me excited about the arts again. So hopefully we'll be able to get into the studio and work again. So that'll be fun.
Awesome. I think that's how old geezers like us stay interested. It's vampiring off the energy of people who want to learn. They don't realize how much of a trade-off it's going to be.
Oh yeah, it totally is. Yeah. He helped belt down my table, and I'm going to teach him how to make glass beads. It's a whole circle of life thing. So it's totally cool.
That's so awesome. I'm super excited to see what he does next and what you guys come up with together.
Yeah, it should be super fun.
Very cool. Well, thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much. Super nervous, but super excited, and thank you for having me. Thank you for asking. This is cool.
Yeah. My pleasure. From the moment I met you, I was like, oh, she's mine. I was really happy to do this. Tomorrow, my sister and I are interviewing Duke Sven. It is the last of her ducal interviews, and he is her consort. He's also the first king that I ever served in the SCA. So he has shaped both of our paths in the SCA quite a bit. And so it's going to be kind of a big deal interview. So we're really looking forward to that. Agnes, thank you again so much for tonight and for spending all your time with me and putting together that awesome presentation. You did great.
Thank you so much.
And thank you everyone for watching, and hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.